Good morning, class. Imagine going to school and realizing that there is no book. Imagine a school where you had to study without books, no textbooks, no notebooks, no digital books, no e-books, no phones, no computers, no laptops. What would school be like? You would still have a teacher, you would still have students who would all be meeting together either in a school or in an open space and would be learning. Would that be possible? Yes, it would. And when would that be possible? Yes, you guessed it right. All of this was possible before the age of print. So, I welcome you to today's class, Print Culture and the Modern World. In this particular chapter, it is always difficult for us to imagine a world that did not have books, a world without printed material. We find evidence of print everywhere around us, in books, journals, newspapers, magazines, famous paintings, everyday things, theatre programs, the schedule of the IPL, cinema posters, street corners, hoardings, calendars, almanacs, diaries. We read printed literature, see printed images, follow the news through newspapers, track public debates that appear in print. But we take for granted this world of print and often forget that there was a time before print. We may not realize that print itself has a history which has, in fact, shaped our world. What is this history? When did print literature begin to circulate? How has it helped us to create the modern world? These questions will be answered in the course of this chapter. The learning outcomes of the unit include that at the end of this unit, you, my dear little children, will be enabled to critically think about how the advent of print and how turn around the political and social consciousness across the globe was happening. At the end of this unit, you will be able to develop citizenship through understanding the contribution of print that was growing ideas of debating and questioning to the established authority. The topics that we will be covering in this unit today include the evolution of print, what is print culture, history of books or books before the print revolution, the Chinese accordion book, calligraphy. Of course, there will be flowcharts in between for you to copy in the notebook. Development of print in China, Japan. Maybe we'll touch upon Korea. And some random notes for you to have in your notebook. So in today's world, it's easy to find evidences of print. But what about the time when it did not exist? This chapter will touch upon the evolution of print, its expansion from East Asia to Europe and India, and its impact on the social and cultural lives of the people. I need you to copy this in your notebook. I will go slow on this particular screen so you can copy this as it is in your notebook. Give a heading, Print Culture and the Modern World. It's a chapter from the history textbook, India and the Contemporary World, Part 2. It is chapter number, I think, 7 in your textbook. Great. So now you will obviously start making the flow chart the way it is given. Initially, when there was no print technology, we have 3 things that we have to keep in mind. 1, books were handwritten. 2, pictures were painted by hand. And 3, producing multiple copies of the same book was a very time-consuming, laborious task. Continuation of the same point, calligraphists used to copy books with accuracy. And what is calligraphy? The definition is given to you. The art of beautiful and stylized writing. So what is print culture? It embodies all forms of printed text and other printed forms of visual communication. One prominent scholar in the field is Elizabeth Einstein, who contrasted print culture, which appeared in Europe in the centuries after the advent of the Western printing press, and much earlier in China, where woodblock printing was used from at least 800 AD. To scribal culture. Walter Ong, by contrast, has contrasted written culture, including scribal to oral culture. Scribes are those, let me tell you, who write. Somebody dictates and they write. They are called scribes. So let us look at the history of books. The earliest kind of print technology was developed in China, Japan, and Korea. This was a system of hand printing. From 594 AD onwards, books in China were printed by rubbing paper against the inked surface of wood blocks. As both sides of the thin porous sheet could not be printed, the traditional Chinese accordion book was folded and stitched at the side. By the 7th century, as urban centers bloomed in China, the uses of print diversified. Print was no longer used just by scholar officials. Merchants used print in their everyday life as they collected trade information. Reading increasingly became a leisure activity. New readership preferred fictional narratives, poetry, autobiographies, anthologies of literary masterpieces, romantic plays, etc. Rich women began to read and many women began publishing their own poetry and plays. Wives of scholarly officials published their works, and courtesans or courtiers wrote about their lives. So here, in brief, very much in brief, we are talking about the history of books. Once again, in your notebook, I need you to write this. Earliest kind of print technology. Earliest kind of print technology first came up in China. Then it spread to Japan and Korea. In China, it was known as hand printing or woodblock printing. How was it done? It was done by rubbing paper against the inked surface of wooden blocks. It required skilled craftsmen to duplicate books with accuracy. And the image is of these wooden blocks. And you can see woodblock printing starts in China, goes to Korea, and then to Japan. So the entire East Asia, you can see, is practically the place where print culture originated. So books before print, we'll just go over it slightly in detail, and you will be able to see what we have spoken about. Coming to China, early times, the system of hand printing was used. It existed in China, Japan, and Korea. Woodblock printing was used, in which paper was rubbed against the inked surface of wooden blocks. They made traditional accordion books, which was folded and stitched at the side. Mind you, it is stitched, S-T-I-T-C-H-E-D. So here we are showing you images of how these books were made. You have wooden blocks on two sides, and you can see how the prints are made using wooden blocks. This has to go in our notebooks now. The Chinese accordion book was folded and stitched at the side. Both sides could not be printed as the paper was thin and porous. Both sides could not be printed on as the paper was thin and porous. So coming to calligraphy, I'm sure every one of us knows what calligraphy is, and our smart class always knows what it is. Yet, when we talk about the art of beautiful and stylized writing, it's a visual art related to writing. It is the design and execution of lettering with a broad tipped instrument a dip pen or brush, among other writing instruments. A contemporary calligraphic practice can be defined as the art of giving form to signs in an expressive, harmonious, and skillful manner. Modern calligraphy ranges from functional inscriptions and designs to fine art pieces where the letters may or may not be readable or may not be etched, and the image to your right is classical calligraphy. Once again, this question with its answer goes in your notebook. There's a question for you. The question and its answer go in the notebook. In the late 19th century, there was a gradual shift from hand printing to mechanical printing in China. Why? You have to give your reasons. I'll repeat the question. In the late 19th century, there was a gradual shift from hand printing to mechanical printing in China. Why? Or how did the use of print diversify in China by the 17th century? So let's put the heading there, printing in China, and let's make the same number of boxes as they are on your screen. Point 1, candidates for exams increased. When you explain the point, textbooks for civil service exams were printed. Urban culture bloomed. People shifted to cities. Merchants used books for trade information. Point 3, reading became a leisure activity. Poetry, fiction, plays, autobiographies, anthologies were printed. Point 4, readership increased. Rich women, wives of scholars, courtesans read and wrote poetry, plays, and about their lives. And the fifth and the final point, new technology. Western mechanical presses were imported. Shanghai became the hub of printing. So you have 5 points, 5 marks, well explained. Now we come to print in Japan. I told you we'll be doing print in China and Japan. So Japanese art prints, or ukiyo-e, which literally means pictures of the floating world, have become an increasingly popular art form in the Western world. Their upward floating imagery sprang from the Buddhist ideology that joy is transient and that only detachment from the desire will bring true enlightenment. Japanese printmaking originated in Edo, a region of Japan now very well known as Tokyo, during a time when Japanese political and military power was in the hands of the shoguns. Japan, during that period, was isolated from the rest of the world under the policy of Sakoku, which translates into secluded or closed country. Chinese missionaries introduced hand printing technology in Japan in about 768 to 770 AD. The oldest Japanese book is the Buddhist Diamond Sutra. Mind you, it is not Diamond Sutra alone. You must add the word Buddhist Diamond Sutra. Without that, it's not going to be possible to score. So please make a note. It's going to be called the Buddhist Diamond Sutra, which consisted of text and woodcut illustrations. Pictures were printed on textiles, playing cards and paper money. Poets and prose writers were regularly published and books were cheap and abundant. In Japan, libraries were packed with hand-printed material of various types, like books on women, calculations, instruments, tea ceremony, flower arrangements, proper etiquette, cooking, and famous places. And here we have the Buddhist Diamond Sutra, an image for you. So this is what we need to copy in our notebooks, print in Japan, introduced by Buddhist missionaries from China around 768 to 770. Oldest Japanese book was the Buddhist Diamond Sutra, printed in 868, contains 6 sheets, had woodcut illustrations. Paintings depicted elegant urban culture. Pictures were printed on textiles, playing cards, paper money, books. Books were published on the topics women, musical instruments, tea ceremony, flower arrangements, etiquette, cooking, famous places, calculations. It could all convert into a question. Describe the progress of print in Japan. Describe the progress of print in Japan. So I hope you have been understanding bits and pieces that we have covered so far. Now this is Kitagawa Utamaro, a Japanese artist. He is one of the most highly regarded practitioners of the ukiyo-e genre of woodblock printing, especially for his portraits of beautiful women or bijinga. He also produced nature studies, particularly illustrated books of insects. Utamaro's work reached Europe in the mid-19th century, where it was very popular, enjoying particularly acclaim in France. He influenced European Impressionists, particularly with his use of partial views and his emphasis on light and shade, which they imitated in France. So one more thing that goes in our notebooks now. Books were exported in large numbers. Production of handwritten manuscripts increased. Written by scribes or skilled handwriters, hired by wealthy patrons or booksellers. Book fairs were organized. Another thing that goes in our notebook, as usual, experiential learning activity is the title. What do you have to do? Design a poster highlighting the future of reading. You will need a sketch pen, a chart paper, or any other paper of your choice and color which will fit in your notebook, a pencil and other material. You will design the poster highlighting the future of reading and artistically present it in your notebook. Each student will design the poster highlighting the future of reading and complete the activity. At the end of it, you will write what you have observed after you have seen a few of your own class. So all the work that has to go in the notebook, rerun the video and make the flowcharts that you may have missed when there was no printing technology. Earliest kind of print technology, the Chinese accordion book, print in China, print in Japan, benefits of print culture, and the experiential learning activity. Benefits of print culture is the one before the experiential learning activity. So now we have a recap video for you. I will leave the video link in the description box. At any point in time, feel free to go and listen to the video and watch it again and again. If you have any difficulty in the chapter, first feel free to rerun this video as many times as you want to and try and understand what is being said. After that, you will open to print culture and the modern world in your textbook. I think it is on page 153 and I've covered the first two pages, page 154 and 155, which include unit 1 of that lesson. So here's a video.
Most books you read today have been printed in a matter of minutes. However, in the olden days, it would take months to print books. The earliest books were printed using hand printing technology. This technology was first developed in China, Japan, and Korea. Let's go back to ancient China, where skilled woodblock carvers had started printing books from AD 594. In this technique, paper was pressed onto the inked surface of woodblocks. The pages were then stitched to form a traditional Chinese accordion book. This was also known as hand printing. Several copies of these books were made with the help of calligraphists. Initially, books were printed only for people appearing for the civil service examinations. The number of books multiplied later in the 16th century as the number of candidates increased. A century later, urban culture bloomed in China, which introduced reading as a leisure activity. They wanted to read a variety of books such as fictional narratives, poetry, autobiographies, anthologies of literary masterpieces, and romantic plays. During this time, rich women also took up reading and began writing poetry and plays. This reading culture necessitated the introduction of mechanical printing technology in the late 19th century. Eventually, mechanical presses from the Western countries were introduced in China. Interestingly, Buddhist missionaries from China introduced hand printing technology in Japan. In AD 868, the Japanese printed their first book, the Diamond Sutra. Later, in medieval Japan, books were available in plenty and at lower prices. A variety of books could be found at city libraries and bookstores. Meanwhile, an interesting art form called ukiyo emerged in Japan. It was introduced by painter Kitagawa Utamaro. In this procedure, an artist's painting was traced on a paper. This paper was then glued onto a wood block. Then, a skilled woodblock carver would carve a printing block to replicate the artist's lines. Later, this block was inked and printed. Sadly, in this process, the artist's original sketch would get destroyed.